Thank you for joining us for another edition of From the Frontlines. I'm joined today by Ryan Rich. He's a co-executive director of learning at Noblesville Schools. Good afternoon.
Hello, it's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. You're here today to talk about standardized testing. I know that the Indiana Department of Education has told schools that your spring testing needs to go on as scheduled, but Noblesville and a number of other school districts here in the county and statewide are pushing back on that. Tell us why.
Yeah, absolutely. It really comes down to making sure there's a focus on the well-being of our students and trying to make sure that we maximize what time we have with those students in school to focus on learning. We are primarily concerned regarding ILEARN. There are various other state tests that have to happen. iRead 3, for example, is going to be happening soon. If with our elementary students, but the scope of that test is relatively small compared to ILEARN. ILEARN impacts students grades 3 through 8 across our entire district, and we don't have a concern necessarily with ILEARN. This isn't about a concern regarding standardized tests. If we want to have that debate, we could have that debate or discussion separately. It's really about just how do we make this happen. Given the circumstances that we're currently facing. We're operating many different models of learning for our students, both in person and virtually. And the state has said that this test has to happen in person for all of those students. And so that's a real struggle for us right now.
Well, the Department of Education and now the Biden administration say this testing is really important because it identifies learning gaps caused by the pandemic. What do you make of that?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to that statement, I think what concerns educators like myself the most is that it implies that we don't have other measures that we're using. We have moved forward with all of other assessments in the district. We do assessments that focus on measuring students' growth over time. That's called NWEA. We've moved forward with our regular high ability identification assessments. We've moved forward with our curriculum-based measures that are implemented at each grade level. So at the local level, we are getting the data, we're monitoring the data, and we will use the data that we have here to be able to best meet the needs and make decisions for our students here in Noblesville. So I think that's what I struggle with most, is that that statement or those positions imply that without standardized assessments, schools won't and can't know their students and what their learning levels are. And that's just not true. We know our students. We have these local measures in place to do that job for us.
I know that ILEARN has to be administered between April 19th and May 14th. You guys sent a letter to the state education department along with 7 other school districts,
right,
asking them to reconsider these current requirements. What, if anything, have you heard back from them?
Up to this point, we've not received any indication that any of those requests are going to be granted. We don't like to just come with problems. We also like to provide potential solutions. And so we were very appreciative after the letter was sent to have some follow-up conversation with folks at the DOE, and we were very gracious for that. And when we met with those folks, we did provide about 4 or 5 different suggestions, expanding the testing window, maybe moving the assessment until early fall of next school year, relaxing some of the requirements that are placed upon individuals who can administer the test so we can have more hands on deck to help get this job done. There were a series of suggestions that were made to help solve this logistical, and it's truly a logistical issue that we're running into when we have to figure out how we can maintain safety through social distancing physically in our buildings while still having to bring in the over 600 students that are currently fully online into those buildings. There are transportation issues. You may have to feed students lunch when they come in. How do we do restroom breaks? Where do we have the space to put these students in our physical plants, in our locations, in our buildings? Gymnasiums, media centers, in many of our schools are being used as cafeteria spaces right now so that students can be socially distanced during lunch. I could kind of go on and on here in terms of talking about all of the different logistical hurdles that truly make this almost impossible to really make happen given the current constraints. So again, it's not debating the merit of ILEARN. It's really asking, how can we make this happen realistically given all of these current parameters that we have to operate under with health and safety?
You mentioned the 600 kids who were learning virtually. I know that you're federally required to hit 95% participation rate. So how do you reach those kids who are learning virtually? What about those who are out sick or under quarantine? I mean, I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around that.
Yeah, absolutely. The 95% rule is in effect, although I will give the state credit that they are working to release Indiana schools from federal accountability by having at least 95% of the students take the assessment. My argument there would be the DOE, the reason they're asking is because they know that most schools are not going to be able to meet that threshold. But then that also begs the question, then how valid then are these results that we're getting? And so is now the effort going to generate the kind of valid quality assessment results that we need to truly make decisions? That's a real concern. I mentioned earlier, are doing other testing. We have invited parents to bring their students in. We've been very clear about health and safety protocols for doing that. And with, for example, our NWEA growth assessment, we had less than 50% of our online learners come in to take that test. So past practice is typically a pretty good indicator of future success when it comes to things like this. We know based upon that return rate, it's very unlikely that we're going to get all or even most of our online learners to feel comfortable enough to come in. These parents want their kids in school. There's a reason why they're not. Normally, there's a medically compromised individual in the home. There's some sort of concern that COVID or exposure could create a real health problem or a real concern for them. And so that's why they're at home. And so they're real hesitant for obvious reasons to come into a school building right now.
I know that there's some discussion to have like a hold harmless provision written in there, so you don't lose certain federal funding. But is that really what it's about for you guys?
It is not at all what it's about. I think that's a great question, and that gets to the heart of the real issue. Again, we don't have a problem, and we invite accountability. That's not our issue here. Our issue is not here with standardized testing. It is with us not being able. It's like, help us understand, please, how we can physically make this happen in a safe way for our students and families. And that gets back to the suggestions that we've provided, the requests that we've made. We're just asking for some sort of flexibility so that we can better do this in a safe manner for our students. And that's just not what we're getting right now.
So is there anything that parents can do, or that if they're frustrated or would like to ask the State Department of Education to think about, what is there any way that we could voice our opinions or our concerns?
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, we have to remember that testing is a function of legislation. And I really encourage folks to have a voice with their local and state legislators. Let your voice be known. Let your opinion be known. I will say that many of our legislators do listen. I mean, we've had conversations here from our district with those folks, and while we may not always agree, they will definitely listen. So I think the more that the decision makers in power can hear those comments, those concerns, they hear that, I think that can start to make a difference. The Department of Education is a function of the legislation that exists, the policy that exists. And so if parents have concerns about that I think voicing that opinion to those state legislators, those local legislators, as well as the DOE through their website and through email as well, it's absolutely going to help. It can't hurt.
Anything else you want to add? I didn't ask. Anything that we ought to be considering as we move into testing season?
I think what I would ask is for parents in the community to be patient with school districts and to be understanding that at the end of the day, this is a mandate. And if these flexibilities aren't provided, we will have to make choices and decisions in order to make this testing happen. It may not be decisions or choices about schedule and planning that even we like as educators, but we may be forced to do. And so we would ask that everyone understand that we're all on the same page, we're all on the same team. We want to focus on what's best for kids. But at the end of the day, law is law, mandates are mandates. And if we have to do this, we'll do the best we can within the parameters that are set for us right now.
Ryan Rich with Noblesville Schools, thank you so much and good luck to you in the coming weeks. Hopefully we'll learn something new soon.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.